I think the first time that Mr. Richard invited me, he was so nervous to have me here. He said, they do throw napkins and they may offend you. And so I said, this is exactly the group I want to go and visit with. And so it's a blessing to be back here with you all. Maybe it was 12 years ago. I've been with Catholic Charities for 20 years now, so these years kind of blur. When you were opening up, I thought you were saying that it's Socialist Sunday, and and so I didn't know which group. I see the Beaver Club, but you said the social is Sunday, not Socialist Sunday.
And social.
Socialist.
Sunday. Social is on Thursday.
Socialist Sunday.
Mark Ross, our socialist member, moved.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, where am I? Socialist Sunday. But it's so good to be here with you to speak about the work that we've done here in the community. You know, we have been in the community now for going on 50 years. In the next year's our 50th anniversary. And the work that's been done over the years has been remarkable. A couple of years ago, when Bishop Desautels was brought to Lafayette, I asked his secretary in the first week, I said, I'd like to invite the bishop to come spend an 8-hour day with us. And she goes, oh, Kim, you need to be, you know, he hadn't met everybody in this building yet. And, you know, 8 hours is too much. You can't ask him for that. And I said, no, you know, ask for 8, you know, and all you can say is no. And so she said, well, I'm embarrassed to ask him for that. And I said, well, you just ask him. So an hour later, she called me back and said, well, he's agreed to an 8-hour day with you next week. And I said, well, I thought he'd come back with like 2. You know, you ask for 8, you get 2, you know. And so I said, what am I going to do with this man for 8 hours? I don't know. And so so he came to spend 8 hours with me the next week. And at the end of the day, he looked at me and said, is this all we do? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh gosh, like we do a lot. We take care of a lot of people, and we're sheltering hundreds of people. We're feeding hundreds of people every day. We're doing a lot. And he said, yeah, but it's not enough. And we have poverty and people suffering across this region, across this diocese. And as Catholic Charities, you need to be reaching out to everyone that's in need. So I asked him if he was going to give us money, and I'm happy to expand what we do, but we would need financial support from the church, to which before that time we were not receiving any funding from the church, and so we were responsible for all of our fundraising. So now we have a second collection, and that brings in about $30,000-$40,000 a year, but otherwise we are fully responsible for our fundraising and grant writing, which we do with a lot of tenacity. And we have grown significantly since that challenge that he had of us growing into the region. Unfortunately, the opportunities to grow came when we had COVID hit in 2020. That provided the opportunity for us to reach out to the churches in the rural communities that were feeding hungry people, that were trying to help people that were suffering. So we began bringing meals out to Ville Platte and Mamou and over in Kaplan and Franklin and Lorville and all over the region. The problem was that people couldn't find food. You couldn't buy food. And all the grocery stores were bare. And so we stepped in with our relationships with the grocers here in this community, and we were able to provide food. We went from providing 100,000 meals in 2019 to ramping up. Last year we provided 500,000 meals. And so it was an ambitious endeavor. I'm proud of the work that we did in the recent years, and not only serving out of St. Joseph's Diner here in Lafayette, but we served meals throughout our whole region. The other opportunity for serving outside of Lafayette came with the hurricanes in recent years. That the hurricanes that we've seen, you know, are unprecedented. My first week as CEO of Catholic Charities was Hurricane Katrina. And I remember that week, I was very young, just named the executive director of Catholic Charities. A week later, Hurricane Katrina came, and there were hundreds of people standing outside of our door asking for help. And I crawled underneath my desk and said, I can't do this. And there's no way I can't do this. And it's too much, it's too big. And my mentor that had been working with me, that was a board member, stood at the desk and said, you can't quit. You have to get up and you have to keep going. And I said, okay, I'll keep going today, but I don't know about tomorrow. And so when the hurricanes happened, Hurricane Laura, we felt compelled to go to Lake Charles to work with the community there because so much had been devastated, so much had been lost. And the Catholic Charities in Lake Charles was run by this little nun. She's so cute. She's about this tall. She drives a refrigerated 18-wheeler. But they only had a few people working over there. They had no internet, no power, no water. They were completely shut down. And so we went over to Lake Charles and began working and served in Lake Charles for, I feel like we're still working in Lake Charles and supporting the recovery efforts of the people of Calcasieu Cameron Parish. Hurricane Delta hit, which impacted not only the same area as Laura, but it came into our region. And many of the homes in our region were damaged. And so we're still rebuilding homes today in our region. We do everything from, the first few days where we go to help remove debris from people's homes. We get trees off of people's homes. We do this with volunteers. We have a chainsaw team of volunteers that help us remove trees from homes, tarp roofs. If there's water and damage in the homes, we go and remove the sheetrock. We remove, cabinets and things that need to be taken out of the homes and treat for mold. After that phase is done, we go back and rebuild. Right now, we're replacing roofs. We had 1,800 homes on our list for Hurricane Delta in our region of Acadiana. We have worked through, I think that we are down to about 400 homes left on our list. I think that many people think that, these homes are already taken care of, or that insurance will take care of it, or it's somebody else's problem or you don't see it. But many times there are barriers to people fully recovering. We find that people haven't opened successions, and so they don't have clear title to their homes. So they don't have the right to apply for FEMA assistance. They're underinsured. They can't afford the deductibles, all the different issues that we see. And so we use our volunteer labor, we use donated materials, and donated money to try to piecemeal these projects together. We have volunteer groups that come in from all over the country. Recently, we hosted a group called Harvest Call. They're part of the Apostolic Church. We had 60 licensed contractors that spent 4 months here in Lafayette rebuilding homes that were affected by Hurricane Delta. They were plumbers, carpenters, electricians, roofers, and they volunteered 4 months to rebuild homes in our community.
Where did they stay?
They rented the Baptist Center out in Eunice, maybe?
That was the group.
Yeah.
When you said that,
Yeah.
we had a retreat the week they left.
Okay.
We were waiting for them to leave so we could have a room.
Yeah.
You said Harvest Call, and they were there
Yeah.
for 4 months. That was a good group.
They were an incredible group. And right now we're preparing to receive the Mennonites that are coming in for a few months to help us. I love the Mennonites because they do excellent carpentry work. And so they rebuild from ground up. And so we have a number of homes that we're going to be working with the Mennonites to rebuild in the coming months. And we're housing those actually in our volunteer housing. And so all of that's going on. Then the following year, we have Hurricane Ida. And I thought that I'd seen the worst disasters that we could have. And driving down to home at Thibodaux 2 days after Hurricane Ida, I think I wasn't prepared for what we saw down there. The loss in home at Thibodaux and down the Bayou region was catastrophic. And I don't know how many of y'all have been down there since the storms. The damage was just incredible, and the people were still there. And I think that, and they were so hard to get to without having fuel to get down the bayou and back up. There were so many people that didn't evacuate, had lived in the area for all their lives, had weathered every storm, thought that they could weather this one, and the reality was that they couldn't. And so many people were just left with unimaginable loss. There was no water, and so they were bathing in the bayou. They were using the bayou water to flush the toilets, and then all the fish died with the saltwater intrusion. And so the smell in the area was just devastating. And the heat with no electricity for months and months. So we are still, we were committed then, we're committed now to helping our neighbors. We believe in helping people when they can't help themselves. And I think that that's a fine line that we have kind of walked on for all these years, is that we believe that when someone can't take care of themselves and they're in a vulnerable situation, there should be an organization that steps in to intervene and to help someone. But as soon as they can take care of themselves, we need to back off, and we shouldn't help people in those situations where they can help themselves. It's hurtful to them. And so we keep saying that about home at Thibodaux, that we'll stay with them until they can take care of themselves, and then we're scratching our heads saying, how long is that going to be? And so we still remain dedicated to the home at Thibodaux region. We've invested and raised close to $800,000 that we have put in actual dollars spent in the Bayou region through food that we've purchased, gas that we have moved down there. In the first 2 weeks, we helped move 2,000 gallons of gas down to Grand Isle, which was something that I never thought I'd be in the fuel distribution business. But there was no fuel. And so, and then in rebuilding, we've made those commitments to them and have followed through with it. So when we look back, between the food programs, the disaster programs, and in our sheltering programs, we've always been committed to sheltering people that are experiencing homelessness. We had 166 people in our shelter when COVID began, and we look like a nursing home. Like, everybody's in wheelchairs, everyone's medically vulnerable, and we're hearing that medically vulnerable people are, susceptible to, negative outcomes if they get COVID. And in that time, we were not turning anyone away for shelter. If anyone needed shelter, we would say yes, and if we didn't have a bed, they could sleep on the floor. In 20 years of working with Catholic Charities, I've buried close to 500 people. And I have claimed I've gotten too many phone calls from the coroner's office when someone dies on the streets in Lafayette and they need to be identified. It's been heartbreaking for me to see people die alone on the streets of Lafayette. And so I had made the commitment of never turning anyone away, and that if they're going to die, I'd rather them die with us honoring their dignity and taking care of them as people, than to die alone on the streets. And so 166 people in our shelters, COVID happened, and I said, we're going to have to shelter in place. And my staff said, well, how are we going to shelter these people in place? They leave all the time. And I said, we're just going to buy a bunch of cigarettes. I said, we're going to buy a bunch of cigarettes. And we're going to play bingo, and we're going to talk conspiracy theories. And so for months, we kept everybody in the shelters, talk about some real good conspiracy theories. Probably some of them were right on point. And we had time limits on which we'd bounce from news stations, so that like there wasn't, we had an hour with Fox, an hour with CNN, and so we were, getting all the information out there, right?
You claim that you watched an hour of CNN?
Look, we'd bounce, right? And smoke and talk about it. Look, no one left, and no one got COVID for months. And so what ended up happening was when the stay-at-home order was lifted, our staff started going to church. And they came back in, they were working 12-hour shifts. Well, they started testing positive. And we're like, okay, if we have an outbreak, we're going to overtake the hospitals just with us. So we made the decision to move to a hotel. And we said, okay, we're going to do this for a few weeks until COVID dies down. It's been 2 years. And so we got real particular about how we defined homelessness. Because if you're offering hotel rooms, everybody becomes homeless. And I told them that we weren't in the business of helping or housing the uncomfortably housed, because there were so many people that were staying with their mom or their cousin, and or we called the mom and them. And when all the kids were home from school, it got real uncomfortable. And no one was leaving for work. Everybody's kind of cooped into the house, and overcrowded houses got, I had a hard time living with just my family. And so we were very stringent on who we took into our hotel program, to make sure that we were specifically working with people that were actually homeless. We still remain in the hotels today with our homeless families with minor children and our homeless disabled veterans. All of our single individuals, men and women, are back in congregate shelters. And we, it has been just a trying time for us. Trying to, when you're looking at charitable work and trying to feed as many people as possible, shelter as many people as possible on a shoestring budget, you have to do it with volunteers. We didn't have volunteers. You have to do it with donated food. We didn't have donated food. And you have to provide it all in one location as fast as you can, and we couldn't. And so it's been an incredible 2 years. I'm thankful for our staff that continue to show up and put their own health at risk to do the work that we do. I'm grateful for the many donors that have stepped forward to help make the work possible. And I'm glad that we're kind of on the other side of, we believe we're on the other side of what COVID looks like. And looking forward to coming back to a new normal of what our charitable works look like, what our needs in our community are, and just looking forward to a new normal. I don't know. So I want to open it up for questions. I can start story time, but yeah.
Going to some conspiracy theories?
Yeah.
The Beaver Club with any of those?
No. Do y'all have any questions? I think that there's, yes.
What hotels were y'all using?
So we're in a hotel off of Collie Saloon. The one rule that I had was I didn't want to be on the thruway. And so we're on off of Collie Saloon in a hotel that is kind of tucked away. And we're in one hotel. We staff it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The population that we work with are severely mentally ill. And so if we don't staff it, then we would have never made it this long. So if there's an issue that arises, our staff is there to handle the situation.
Y'all have the entire hotel. It's not
We have a,
sharing it with the public. The public using it too?
although, I mean, we took up for the majority of the hotel for those 2 years, but as we've backed out, and I kept saying, we can't take anybody else in the hotel. And the problem is that moving them back into housing is a challenge because we've lost so much of our housing as a result of the hurricanes. So many people have relocated here from Calcasieu and now from the Bayou region because of the loss of housing. So what affordable housing we had on the market here is just not there anymore. And so we have a number of people that have housing vouchers in hand, but we can't find housing for them. And so I'm like, we're paying $40 a night every night for this person. They have a housing voucher in their hand. I think that we need to look at affordable housing development in our area. I want somebody else to do that. I don't want to do that.
Tim, tell them, sin and shame, how many homeless are veterans?
So going way back, when I first came in, so 60% of the men in our shelter were veterans. And so in our region, we had a little over 300 homeless veterans. We can't have that. You know, anyone that has signed up to serve their country and up until, you know, risking their lives to serve our country should not find themselves without a home in that country. It's a justice thing for us, and I think all of us in this community feel strongly that veterans shouldn't be sleeping on our streets. We partnered with the VA. We wrote a national grant back in 2007, I think, to open up a facility specifically for veterans. We started off with male veterans. It was approved, and we began operating St. Michael's Center for Veterans in 2008, and specifically started targeting homeless veterans. The VA Medical Center in Alexandria comes twice a week and provides clinical services to veterans on our campus, and fast tracks them for their benefits. Many of them that we've worked with, we were able to get service-connected disability benefits dating back to the Vietnam War. Those guys, I mean, it was incredible for them to end up with back pay dating back to the Vietnam War. And you know, still some of those guys come pick me up in their Lincoln Town cars, and you know, they're financially okay, although still mentally struggling. But I feel like we have been able to take care of that backlog of Vietnam era veterans in our community that were on the streets. Today we have, it's under 20, but I think today it's about 16 homeless veterans in our region. We know them all by name. We have housing plans for every one of them. And our goal is to make sure that when that homelessness amongst our veteran population is rare, it's brief, and it's non-recurring. And so the VA has been a great partner in ending veteran homelessness in our community.
How does that back pay work? I don't understand.
They
Pay for what?
so when they got service-connected disability,
Oh, okay.
means
Not
that
disability payments.
means that they were disabled in the war, and that it was a result of their service in the war, and that they had never been acknowledged for that disability.
Did a lot have to do with Agent Orange? A lot of them have to do with Agent Orange? You don't know. Never mind.
I think they were all various
Okay.
disabilities that were related to it. Yeah.
The hotel housing expense that you were referring to, is in this, the program services number? Is that where that number is sort of? So comparably speaking, before you had to rely on hospitals or hotels, what was your housing you know,
So our shelters, to shelter 166 people was about $500,000 a year.
so
And
comparing to the hotel option, we're talking about a huge jump, right? So that's cut into the
Yes.
overhead, I mean, to the
Yes.
margin.
yes. We were, this was in the fall of 2020 when we realized it was going to be more than a few weeks. And we knew the people that we had in our shelters. We couldn't put them on the streets. So many of them were, so disabled. So many of them had young children in their households, and we just couldn't. And we didn't have the money to do it. And as I do with many crises, I'm like, God, like, this is your work. You have to take care of it. So I got a phone call one day. It was in late October 2020. And look, my clients call me and say all kinds of crazy things to me all the time. And as I said, and Jim's recording this, there's always someone naked on the roof wearing a gas mask, okay? So I get a phone call. I get a phone call. So this is Jeff Bezos' attorney. If Jeff Bezos gave you $5 million, what would you do with it? I'm like, and I have in my mind who I think this is, and I'm like, like I'd take a vacation, I'd probably, I'd buy some beer, and, and so I blew him off. He said, okay, well, we're going to send you an email, and in 2 weeks, we need your response. And I was like, oh, okay. I got an email. It was really from Jeff Bezos' attorney. I was like, oh gosh. So I was like, this isn't a joke. This isn't Paul. And I just embarrassed myself and said I'd buy beer and take a cruise with $5 million from Jeff Bezos. And so we had 2 weeks and maybe like 200 words that we had to write what we would do with $5 million. We sent it in. Those are very difficult. It's not a lot of words, but it came at the right time because we desperately needed, more than any time before, we desperately needed the money to continue doing what we were doing. And so we wrote that we would continue this hotel program. And 2 weeks later, they called us and said, what's your stock account? I was like, oh, you mean stock? Because my answer is going to be different if you're talking about $5 million in Amazon stock than cash. And so in November of 2020, we were given $5 million of Amazon stock from Jeff Bezos. Our account manager freaked out. And so it was a problem we had never had before. It was a good problem to have, but it provided us the way to move forward and continue saying yes to people that needed help.
I think it's amazing you found a hotel to actually
Me too.
step in and do this.
Me too. It was a blessing for them, a blessing and a curse, because travel had stopped.
Now it's continuing.
And we were reliably, we were paying reliably. However, when the hurricanes happened, all the people from Calcasieu came in and they were willing to pay top dollar. And we had made a deal, $40 a night. So a lot of our problem children that the hotel owner had tolerated got kicked out. And so that was a problem. And then it happened again with Delta, then with Ida. But it was kind of a blessing and a curse for them. And but we do our best to honor, their building, and we manage our people as best as we can. But so many of the people that we work with that are homeless are so severely mentally ill that it's a challenge. Yeah.
I was going to ask, in y'all's opinion, what's the percentage of people that y'all help and mental illness, and do y'all have resources?
So, mental health has been, I don't think that we've, as a country or society, figured out how to help people with severe persistent mental illness. back in Bobby Jindal's administration, he shut down the majority of the long-term inpatient beds. And so many of those people were then that were long-term hospitalized, were then turned into group homes. And they weren't an appropriate candidate for these group homes because their behavior was so problematic that they really needed to be hospitalized. So eventually they were all kicked out of the group homes and they ended up on the streets. And so one of two things happens. They either end up in jail from problematic behavior or they end up with us and they bounce from us to jail. And we're paying a fortune for it in our local prisons, because when they're in prison, you have to pay for their medical care. So our local jails have been our largest mental health provider. On our end, when we're working with someone who's paranoid schizophrenic, they're having a moment of clarity where they're saying, okay, I'm willing to see a doctor and get help. Those moments are very few and far in between. And we'll say, okay, let's make you an appointment. It takes 4 to 6 months to get an appointment with a social worker who's going to evaluate them to determine whether they need to see a doctor. So let's say in 4 to 6 months, we remember they have an appointment, we know where they're at, and they still agree to go, and we get them there, which is hard for that to happen. We get them there, and let's say they're evaluated and they agree they need to see a doctor. That appointment's made in 4 to 6 months. So let's say we remember they have an appointment, we know where they're at, and they still want to see a doctor that day. We bring them to the appointment. They see the doctor for 5 or 10 minutes. They're written prescriptions. Let's hope that they're the right ones. Let's hope it's the right dose. And they walk out with not enough refills to get to the follow-up appointment. So we're largely working with a unmedicated population that it's next to impossible to get someone stabilized in a mental health crisis. And so we work towards doing our best. We're not clinical. We don't provide medical services. We do our best to work with their behavior and try to get them housed stably. And then once they're stably housed, we work towards their mental health stability. It's a tricky thing. It takes remarkable people to do that work. But we believe that every person, because of their inherent dignity, deserve for their basic needs to be met. And we believe every person deserves to be housed as a basic human need. And so we work real hard to do that.
What do you think your success rate is?
In our housing program, we've only ever evicted one person. So we have a permanent supportive housing program for specifically this population that are chronically homeless with persistent long-term mental illnesses. And we've only evicted one person. I could tell you stories about how we've gotten there, but we have a high mortality rate in that program. We use a vulnerability index in that program to ensure that we're targeting the most vulnerable people on the streets. And it's an assessment that's done, and it looks at how likely are they to die on the streets, if not without an intervention, and how capable are they of pulling themselves out of the situation without external support. So we use those two numbers, and it calculates, and we take the highest scored people in our community and put them in our housing programs, which means that we put them in a house with long-term case management support. And so I'll say that our housing program is remarkably successful. It's very complicated. And our landlords have to be, we have to make sure that we're working with landlords that understand the population that we have. Yeah.
What's your job?
I know sometimes my husband's going, don't you want to do something else? And I'm like, I don't know. I was telling him last night we were watching a movie. These things just remind me of the funny things that have happened. And there was some movie we were watching last night where there was Saddam Hussein in it. And it made me giggle after, I forgot when it was, but I was over at the shelter and one of the guys was like, "Hey, Miss Kim, I called the reward number." And I was like, "For what?" And he goes, "We got Saddam in here." And I was like, "We have Saddam in here?" And they're like, "Yeah, don't tell anybody, we're getting the reward money." And I'm like, "Where is Saddam?" And they're like, "He's over in the corner." And it was a man, he had this long beard, he was an old homeless man, and he had this long beard, and and he had like a towel on his head. And they're like, "Yeah, we got Saddam, don't tell anybody. We're gonna get the reward number." And I was like, oh gosh. They were disappointed. It was not Saddam. And but yeah.
What was your best conspiracy theory? We're weird here. It'll probably fit right in.
Yeah, I'm going to pass on that. There's so many that they're so muddled together. I have letters, y'all, and
We really did go to the moon.
So Kim, I'm
What am
assuming the $5 million gift from Amazon isn't widely publicized.
Yeah.
Because that would attract way too many people on the fringe that aren't in the most of the gift.
So I would have loved to have never announced it. If it had been my choice, I would have never announced it because it has been very difficult for us to fundraise since then. Because everybody's like, "Oh, you got everything taken care of." It was a specific donation for a specific need. And we have these hurricanes that we've been working in that have cost, an unimaginable amount of money to help support the recovery, all the food programs that we work in. So it, more than anything, I think that from the community, I think the community expected this big thing that maybe it'd be a big building that we'd build or this big, something we'd have to show for it. Had it not been COVID, maybe we would have built a big building. But when you build a big building, you have to have the money to operate it year after year. For us, the timing of it and the need that was present and the way we had to respond demanded that we move forward in providing hotel assistance. We still have funds left from it. We have not spent the entirety of the amount. I would like for it to somehow be a permanent source of funding for us through an endowment, the remaining portion of it. But I think that from the community's perspective, there was an expectation that we had a big thing to present. And for me, the big thing that we can present is that you don't see homeless children on the streets of Lafayette. And the big thing is that the things that you don't see. You don't see homeless veterans on the streets in Lafayette. They may have some signs that say they are, but they're not. And if they are, we find them quickly. And so it's more about what you don't see than what you see. Yeah.
So Kim, how was the cruise?
We're going to buy $5 million in cigarettes. Yeah.
How's our homeless population stack up? It's different sizes of cities and so forth, like with Baton Rouge, Shreveport, New Orleans. How are we doing versus those communities, I guess?
So I think that COVID has thrown me off and thrown us off in being able to understand how many homeless people we have. Before COVID, we have a point in time count every January where the whole country counts how many homeless people there are on a specific night. And we have methods that we do this in surveying the streets. We have outreach teams that go and do these surveys. When COVID happened, that threw us all off. We weren't able to do the outreach and engagement that we had before. I feel confident that all of the people that we have in our hotel program were homeless. However, there were other organizations that were doing the hotel programs that were not as stringent on the intake. And so I questioned, at one point, Lafayette had more homeless people than New Orleans. And so I questioned the validity of that data. because I don't believe Lafayette ever had more homeless people than New Orleans. So we're back and trying to understand what our numbers are post-COVID. Our count in January would indicate that we're right below where we were going into COVID. Comparatively speaking, I think that we have a normal number of people experiencing homelessness for the size of our community. The other effect that we had was the Guillory administration took some proactive steps in curbing the visual aspect of people panhandling. And people were arrested if they were publicly seen asking for money, or if they were publicly seen looking like they were homeless. And so it didn't deter people from being homeless, it deterred them from being visible. And so we've had a hard time finding people. As we've resumed our services, they've come out of kind of hiding to come forward for help. But it's just kind of been a wonky time, So.
How many CEOs of major companies that face the kind of operations and situations that she has to face as a CEO? What a job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.